Hello and welcome to Section 8, Part 9. We're going to continue with our formation/navigation setup. I'm going to very quickly cover how it works again because I thought of a better way of explaining it. I'll make it super quick, but if you've watched it in the previous video and you already understood it, skip to the code. But yeah, here we go. So the way it's going to work is you click or even hover with your mouse. This is the mouse position. So this is your destination where you're going to move. And we are moving these three groups here. So this is the actual groups and the units inside them. What will happen first is we'll say we have three groups and we have a group spacing of some distance. And the total of those groups plus the group spacing of three groups is this width. So this width will be placed on, I'm just going to go with a formation of line here, so we're all side by side. So that will be the total width that this formation is, whatever formation, whatever order they're in, that'll be the total width. And we'll get that by, saying, hey, group, how big are you? I'm 2. Okay, I'm 4, I'm 3. Add the group spacing of in between the groups, and we get our total width. We then pre-calculate. We'll just basically divide this distance up into an equal 3 positions, and we've got our group positions now. Now we can assign groups to the positions, and the way we'll do that is we'll get the group, and we'll do this table. That's where we'll do that that bulk calculation to calculate who's the shortest distance to where. So say this group is going to be here. Oh, let's just move them. There we go. So this group is going to go to that position. This one is going to go to that position. And this one is going to go to this position. Now you can see it doesn't line up with those existing groups perfectly. So what will happen is when we say, okay, we've assigned the group positions, these are now the final group positions. So this position will probably be here, so we can fit this one in. So it might even be further. Let's just line these up. Come on, work with me here. And then the actual group position for this one will be here. And then the actual group position for this one will be here. So now we have the actual group positions in the formation. Now what we need to do is calculate the entity positions in the formation. So it kind of goes hand in hand. So the actual spacing of these group positions will be determined by how many entities are in the group, what their size is, how much space the group needs. But for example, if you zoom into, let's do this 3 entity group, we could have 2 soldiers and a tank here. So this is going to be a very different group on the ground than what it would be just if we just measured it generic. We'll have the total spacing, but the point is when we calculate the entity positions, it might not be just as simple as, this guy's spot on in the, like the center, or the center one's probably always going to be in the center, but this one might be a tank and he might need, extra spacing or something like that, and then that's a normal unit. So the actual group on the ground might be something like that. And the reason why we need to know the actual entity positions exactly is because when they're moving from those positions that they were in before, we need to know exactly where each entity is going to go. So if this guy's, he's going to go here, he's going to go here, and he's going to go here, say. But that's what will get calculated when it goes. Like it might work out something different. That the totals for that movement might work out that this guy's going to go here. This one's going to go here, and this one's going to go here, or something like that. Not ideal, but like it may work out to be that sometimes, but we need to know exactly which unit is going where so we can determine these exact positions with the correct spacing. I hope that made that a little bit clearer, but that's what it's doing. I'm going to switch over now, straight back to the code where we left off in the last part. So the first thing we're going to do in these things is just validate our data. We probably should have done that here as well. Let's do I think we have an isValid function. Yep. So if it's not valid, we're going to just return. Because we're passing by reference, that'll just pass back whatever navigation data we had. So I'm going to clean this up a bit. There we go. And then we'll do the same on these ones, but we'll also check that our formation data is valid as well. And we'll be doing that on this one as well. So now to create those initial, and what I'm talking about here is these temporary group positions. That's what we're going to be creating now. We're going to need some variables for spacing. So I'm going to create some Now another thing we're going to need is a variable to know if we have an odd group of units or not. The reason for that is, so if we have, this will be better. If we have an odd group, we've got a center position. If we don't have an odd group, the center position's in the middle here. So we want to actually offset by half each side of the center position, and that's why we need to know if it's odd count or not. And we can do that by using the mod on the number of selections. This is the groups, remember, not the... I was showing entities in that little example, but it is for groups. Selections, isn't it? So if you've never used modular before, it is the handiest thing you're ever gonna... It is perfect for calculating left and right and odd and even. So if you go to your calculator and change it to... This is just Windows calculator, change it to scientific, you get the mod button here, and this is what it is. It stands for modular. So if you look at this, so we've got 3 groups, and we do mod 2, gives us 1. And basically what modular does is it tells you the remainder after you divide it. 3 divided by 2 is, well, the remainder is 1, right? So take 2 from 3, there's 1 left. So that tells you that it's 1. And now if I go, okay, well, what's my 4 group? So 4 divided by 2, there's no remainder, so it's 0. And then what happens when I go to 5? It's 1. So you can see it alternates left, right, or odd, even. It's very handy. It doesn't matter what the size of the number is of your selections or whatever you're using it for, you can always get an alternating, and we'll use it again later to, you know, we're going to have the alternating left and right. Anyway, enough maths. Let's just bring that up. So now we want to assign our offset. Actually, no, we can do that in the loop. So because we'll need to reset it. So let's just do a loop on our selections. Sorry about my neighbor's dog there. But we need a vector for the offset, which is in our formation data. So each loop, we're just resetting that back to what it is in the formation data. That's all we're doing there. Let's do some comments. So that's our alternating phase. So now in here, this is where we start doing our center position, our left and right. So the first one will be, for the center position, we need to know, is it the first unit? That's what we want to know first. And then we want to know, is it the odd count that's going to affect? So if it's an odd count, then the position is just in the center. Now I'm calling them side because I've got a left and right side as a weird terminology, but I'm just calling it center side. So in our navigation data, we've got an array of positions, and this is what we need to populate now. So where is that? So these positions here. So we're going to start populate this array with these formation positions. You can see it's got a bit of data to it, but this is what we'll use to pass around for like a group to know where to go, and also an entity later for an entity position. So if this is an odd count, going back to our diagram, so we've got an odd count here. The center position is just the navigation position. If it's the first group, it's going to be where we clicked. So it's going to be that one. So formation position, I'm going to create a struct. And the navigation position in our navigation data is where we clicked. So I'm going to assign it to that. And same with the rotation. And the reason why we were sort of rehashing and repopulating this data is so later on, we don't have to pass the whole navigation data to things that need it. We can just pass, here's your position, or, you know, like, you don't need to send bulk data later. If you're wondering why, well, you can just read that from the navigation data later. That's what's happened. We're just creating subsets of data. And then this is, as you can see by the hint there, it is the entities selection side, and this is the center side. Now I'm going to handle the not count here in the left and right calculations. So this is just if it is an odd count. Here, so now that we've added that center position, what we're going to do is add the we're going to add half the distance for this. So we're basically saying this group, we're going to add its spacing here off this center position. So then we can, on the next position, we can add the other half of their spacing and assign the position. And then if there was another group on the other side, we'd add another half of spacing to get the next one. And that's what we're doing. So here we want to in our spacing left variable here. So I think I'm going to rename some of this. So the naming I've got at the moment is going to get a bit confusing. So we've got this group spacing, we've got this entity spacing, and that is meant to be as in the group spacing, as in, we come back to here, this spacing, how much the total group spacing that the group takes up, and then the entity spacing is how much the entity needs within that group. But we also have group spacing, which is the distance between the two groups that we want. So I'm going to rename, what is it? I'm going to rename this to selection spacing. And then the entity spacing, we don't need that on this navigation data. The entities will handle that. So I'm going to rename this group spacing. And this will be what's actually the spacing between groups, and this will be the spacing that the entire selection takes up. So the spacing left will be the group selection spacing plus that group spacing. And I don't actually think we're assigning this yet. So it gets assigned through the constructor, which is not sorted yet, because we're going to need these variables before we start doing the formation calculation. It's just like the data that we're going to need to create it. In the update command data on the player controller command, this is where we're first sort of assigning the command data, and we've got this function here, get command navigation data, and just temporarily we put in a blank navigation data. So what we actually want to do is not do a blank navigation data and pass in those variables that are for this constructor here. So let's just do this so we can see what we need to do. I'll delete that in a sec. But so we need the ID for the formation we're going to use. We need the target location, and we can get some of this from the command data. So command data that we're passing in here. Again, sort of doubling up, but this is so we can pass navigation data and we don't have to pass the whole command data. So the destination or the navigation is going to be the destination for the command, so we can get the location. And then the rotation is the same. Just so this is giving me less errors, I'm just going to put in here ID. And then what's next? The group spacing. So this is, well, we just changed this, didn't we? I probably should change that name. So this in-group spacing will be the what do we call it? Selection spacing. And this one will be the in-group spacing. So we're going to need to do some calculations here to get that. And how we're going to do that, we're actually going to create, I don't think we've done it already, but so in the command data, we have the selected, and we have the, selections. So we have the selections array. So in here, we're going to create a function that gives us the average spacing of all the groups within the selection. Because remember, we don't need exact points here. All we're trying to do is determine which group is going where quickly. So we need sort of rough positions to calculate those distances and stuff. So let's create a function here that returns a float. Bit of a long name. That's what we're going to do. So this is going to feed into a bit of a chain here, because we're going to need to go to each group and say, well, what's your width, and so on and so on. But we'll get there. So we're in the data now for the selections or selected. And then, so yeah, we're going to have to go through each selection and just get a total of their spacing requirements. So So this should be selections with an S. It'd be plus equals, because we're just going to add to it that 0 total. Make sure that's a float. And then we'll go and, so now we'll go to the actual selection data and get that individual selection spacing requirement. We'll create in a sec. Or now. So let's go, so if we go to selections and go to this struct again, come down the bottom here and do the same thing. So we're going to return a float. It's going to be that name and be const. So in here, there's going to be two types of spacing that we're going to get for what makes up the spacing for a selection. And the first one's going to be the spacing between the entities. And then the second one will be what each individual entity wants as its own space, like its minimum required space. So if you have a character, you know, it's probably going to be 50 to 100 wide. And then if you've got a vehicle, say, it's probably like more like 400 wide or 200 wide or something like that. So this first one here will be, we'll get the not group, entity spacing, which is, oh no, it is sort of groups. Get the groups entity spacing. That's where it makes more sense. So we'll just create a variable for that. And then we need to go to the entity, and that's our entity component, which is, I can't remember what we even called it now. Hang on. Yeah, component. Why isn't that coming up? Oh, I put an E there. Right? Should be a U. There it is. So this is the interface for all our entities. Oh no, sorry, this is the group. Sorry, we will need this, keep this. Sorry, this is the, well, let's just push it down here for now. This is the group spacing for each entity, sorry. If we come to our group here, this is what we want to interface with. I don't think we have a command to get the spacing at the moment, so we might create that. Got one for get data, which is what we need to read. I'll just put it up here. And then we need to just access our data. Let's copy all this. So if we've got our data, we can then return our group spacing. We even have, maybe I haven't done the variable for that yet. Right. So you can see this data management is going to be our biggest problem. It gets crazy. So yeah, bear with me. Let's go to our group data asset and add some navigation stuff here. And we'll call this default entity spacing. Because at some point you're going to want to be able to change this at runtime. This will be the initial value. For now, we're just going to read directly from this default value though. I'm just going to put this to 100. And then I'm going to duplicate this one. Call it default group spacing. Change to 250. The other, we're going to need, I'll just copy this header. We're going to need a list of formations that the group is able to achieve. So you may have different units that you don't want to be able to do different formations, and this is where you just leave that formation out of this array here. This will be formations, and then just data assets. I think we'll need some more data here later when we get into calculating actual navigation, but we'll leave that for then. So now we should be able to pass back the entity spacing. And if we can't find the data, we'll just return that default over 100. So now we can use this in our, we need to get the group first. So the player selection has the group here. So we'll just check that it's valid. And then we want to calculate the entire selection spacing. So it'll be this entity spacing plus how big are the individual entities sort of thing. I'm going to go over each entity in this selection. That's where we can use this now. It'll be the entity of this iteration. So we want to get the entity's required minimum spacing. I'm not sure if we have, I only doubt we've got this function. We'll create that in a sec. And then once we do have it though, we want to add to this selection spacing, and we want to add that entity required spacing plus the group spacing, which will give us, so that gives us a spacing for one entity, and then we can return that spacing. That'll be the total spacing required for this selection. So let's go to our component, create this function. Yeah, probably put it under selection here. I'll make it virtual const. And it's the same sort of setup as the group here. We're going to get the data, so I'm just going to copy that from up there, and we're going to return the entity's minimum spacing. So there's a couple of ways you could do this too. Like, you don't have to have it set on the data. You could actually get their collision box and calculate the spacing, but I'm going to put it on the data as, or it looks like I already have. So that'll be the minimum spacing that that entity will need to take up. And it's defaulted to 100 by looks, but that'll be, you could calculate that based on the collision sphere if you want to, and you could do that in this function here. I'm going to return 50 by default though. There we go. So back where we were using that should be good. Let's get const. So now we're returning the spacing for each selection here, and we'll end up with a total selection. After we get the total, we want to now divide that to get so this is the total for all selections, and we want to get the average spacing. So we're going to first of all, we're going to check that it's not equal to 0, because we start dividing by 0, it's always bad. So I shouldn't do not equal, I should do, yeah, we don't want to do that. Let's do in an fmath library is nearly 0. That will be, gives it some tolerance and a bit more accurate. And then we're just going to check also, in case that float doesn't quite work out or something, we're just going to check that we've got selections. So as you divide by 0, it's going to instantly crash, so you don't want to do that. And then we can return, if all that fails, we'll just return some sort of generic average spacing, and I was going to put it to 1,000, which is probably going to be really bad if, if it doesn't work, but anyway, it should never get to here. All right, so that gives us our average selection spacing for our current selections. So we're using this in creating our navigation data. So that was on our player controller. So here we want to do a variable here. So float average spacing equals so it was on our selection data. So if we go selected, should be able to access that average selection requirement. I'm going to change this to selection. I've changed the naming mid-go, so I'm going to be going back and forth. But that's going to be our group spacing now. So that's our selection spacing. Now we can do the group spacing, and we're going to do a similar thing. So I'm going to duplicate this, the average group spacing, because this is we're just getting a rough thing again. I want to change this to group. What we're going to do is copy this whole thing down into here, and just so we don't get confused, I'm going to rename this variable to total selection group spacing. Instead of getting, we want to get each group's spacing. So take the requirement out, because it's actually, we want to get the actual group spacing. So if we follow this function up here to the actual data here for the selection, and we'll have the group here, so we can say get group spacing. And then it's going to be the same as this here, except we're going to just return get group spacing, which we need to create on the group data. And again, just off the group data, and it's the default group spacing. And I might put that to 250. We go back, and then we need a default value here. And then where we go back again. So that gives us the every group might have the same spacing or it might not, but this gives us a total for the spacing, and then we're going to do the same thing again. We're just going to get an average based on the group spacing. So one group might have, I want a 400 spacing, the other group might have I want a 100 spacing, and we're just taking an average just to build a generic formation that we can start calculating data through. We don't have to worry about specific, because these positions aren't going to matter, remember. They're going to be they're just going to be these rough positions, so we can figure out who's going to where first. So let's go back to this. Now we've got the average group spacing, which is going in. What do we got next? This last thing that we need next is the formation threshold. And I think it's worth just coming to, let's go back to the group data here. And I'm going to add another, I'll make it a float. And I'm going to call this the formation threshold. And I'll set this to, I don't know, I might set this to 1,000 for now. This will be something that you want to tweak. But what is the formation threshold? So I don't know if you know this, but in the data assets, if you put a comment here like this, when you hover over this value in the data asset in the editor, it'll come up with this tooltip here. This writing here is a tooltip. So we're going to fill this in as to what the hell this formation threshold is. But essentially what the formation threshold is a distance, or a minimum distance that the group will actually use a formation to move somewhere. So if you're going to move them 10 meters, you don't really want them to form up in a formation and then move there. You just want the units to individually move to their positions. They're still going to be at that next position in a formation, but you don't want them to move along in a formation, like keep the correct spacing and all that. It's a short distance, everyone just move up or move to that position. Whereas if it's over this formation threshold, then we want them to say, okay, I'm going to start using a formation now. And then later on, what we'll do is we'll introduce a minimum distance threshold. So like if say the distance of our navigation is 1,000 meters, then we'll have some sort of percentage-based thing where what's the greater number, this formation threshold or 50% of the movement path. And then what that does is, rather than the group form up in their formation and then start moving, which you might want that, keep that in mind, you might want that. So you might want to change your figures here to reflect that. But using the other way, what will happen is they'll smoothly transition to a formation. So the best way to describe that is if we're moving these guys up to this line here, do we want them to form up into, say they're not in this formation now, they're all over the shot maybe, or maybe they're facing a different direction or whatever. Do we want them to form up in that formation right here and then move? Or can they start moving individually and maybe form up here somewhere? So rather than be standing around, waiting for the other units, they'll slowly move, and then when they get to here, then they'll be in formation and they'll move the rest of the way. Just makes it, you'll see it when we start moving around the editor one day. They'll all smoothly move to a formation and start moving off. All right, enough blah. Let's do a tooltip for this. That'll do. All right, going back. Here. again, we'll just, actually we can probably just get this directly. What we'll do for a selection is we'll get the who is the furthest away, and we'll take whether they're within the threshold or not. So it'll be, actually I haven't been doing them all in directly in here. I'll do it up here as well. So this is where we want to get the largest threshold. I'm just going to put a default. I'll just make, oh, sorry, I'll just leave this here. I'm just checking if the group's valid so we don't have any errors. And then we'll add to our threshold. Oops. And we'll just do a max for this. So it's either the threshold value or the group get formation threshold we need to create. Oh, sorry, it's selections. It'll be this, won't it? And then we can return threshold. Group. Okay. So we want this. I don't know what I've done there. Same again, can be, whoa. Can be const because it's just reading off the data. All this again. And I might default that to 1000. I can't remember what I had it on there, doesn't matter. So that should return our threshold back. Back. So that's our formation threshold. So the only one we need to do now is the formation ID. So the way we're going to handle the formation selection for the entire, the formation data for the entire selection is we're going to get the, later on we'll probably be changing, this will probably need to be changed so you have like a UI interface that you can change the formation, so you'll need to assign it. But for now, this is what we're going to do. Call this get formation. So first thing we need to do is get that. We're in all the selections here, so we need to determine, or we need to check that the lead selection is, how do we do this? We'll go selections, valid index, lead selection index. And I think at the front of this too, we might put lead selection index greater than -1. So it's not, it's 0 or above. And it's also a valid index of our selections. And then we know we've got, so now we have the valid selection. So selection, oops, not I, lead selection index is one we're on. So that's our valid selection. And then in the selection thing, we have this lead, which is an actual actor. And actually, we're going to cast a new line for this. We're actually going to go to that actor's individual entity component and see what that actor's formation is currently. So the formation is done down to individual entities, and the reason why that is because we can have groups. We have a group of 6 and you send 3 over there and 3 over there. They might be, you might want them in different formations, so all the formations is handled individually. Well, technically not individually, but they all have a reference to it individually. So we want to get the entities component of our lead. And if that comes back as null, we know that our lead is null, so that's fine. Don't need to check that that's valid or anything. So now we have our entity component, and we can return our leads entity component get formation, which we'll need to set up as well. Now, if this is all doesn't happen, then we just want to return an empty, like basically an invalid. You could set this to return, like do a lookup for a generic formation or something, but I'm not going to do that there. So now we go to entity component and put this under selection again. We're going to want A for our formation. I'll just put this here, and it will be replicated. The reason why we're going to replicate it is so the UI can have access to it. I'm just going to add that to the replication, like so. And then in here, actually we don't need to do that, we can just do this in line. It'll be we'll need a setter for that as well, so I might as well do that now also. And then what we'll do is we'll call this from the selection data. So this is that's all the selections. We want the actual single selection. And we'll call that here. I might just call it the selection formation. And then we'll just loop over all the entities in this selection. And can we copy this component here? Why isn't that coming up? Okay. Weird. Oh, because it's const. Right. Yep, my bad. And then we pass in this. Oh, this can be by reference. Yeah, there we go. So that we can use that to set an entire selections formation. Where we'll use that, there's two places we're going to want to set the formation. One, when the group spawns, and it's like it needs an initial formation, and then obviously whenever we change the formation. So let's just set the initial formation of all the entities in a group. So we'll do that here on the, I don't know what this is, some sort of watch thing. Oh, it's a search. Right. So yeah, we'll do it here on the initialize. So the group entities come in here, it's assigned, and then we can do the same thing. So I'll just copy this whole thing here. And so we don't have a formation at the start, so what we can do is get the group's default formation. Actually, we didn't assign a default formation, but we can just pick one randomly, or we can, so we just got an array of formations here, so we can either put a new field and have a default formation, which I might do because when we're testing, we probably want to force it to some sort of formation for now, while we don't have a UI to change it. So let's call this default formation. And then we can change that and test the different formations. Oh, we need to get that from the data, sorry. So let's do that up here. That's set for all the entities when they come through. Close that group off. And then back in our back on our player controller where we're trying to get the formation ID to use. So we're essentially getting the formation, the current formation of the lead, and that's coming back through. We've set the default on the entity, so that should come back fine. And then we can pass that formation ID through. And that is our initial navigation data set up on inside our command data. So now, yeah, let's close some stuff off now because we've been all over the place. And let's come back to our formation data asset, create formation positions. And now when we go to add this first position, this is actually valid data. So the location will be set, the rotation, all that stuff. So let's continue here. And then, oh, that's right, we're up to setting the spacing after we've added a position, the center position. So if we've added that center position, we need to do the spacing left and right, and that's going to be the same. If this first position is odd, then we are done with the first position, so we want to continue the loop. We don't want to continue down from here. However, if it either isn't the first position that we're calculating or it isn't odd, then we want to go on to the left and right check positions. So we're going to check if and we're doing that with the mod again, like I said, and we're just going to do I mod 2 is not equal to 0. And that gives us whether it's left, so this will be the first one. Otherwise, it's the right position. This is taking a little bit longer after doing all that navigation data, so I'm going to cut this video here, and then in the next part we'll continue with setting up the group positions and then assigning groups to those temporary positions. Thanks for watching. See you in the next part.